Hello friends, my name is Ness, and today I'm going to be talking about 3-star or 3.5-star books that I love. I've talked recently about the things I've enjoyed and the challenges of being over on TikTok for the last year and a half, and how interesting it's been to engage in discourse on TikTok because it is a sort of nascent book community. A lot of the discourse that is happening over on Book Talk feels like stuff that we were talking about like in 2012 over here on BookTube. One of my earliest BookTube videos was a 2-star review of Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard, and then soon after I felt the need to make a video about why I review negatively and critically and what I get out of it. So like my third video ever on BookTube was here's why I do negative reviews, here's why critical reading is important. And I remember that was in response to a little bit of backlash, at least in terms of people talking about how they didn't want negativity in BookTube and how negative book reviews, like there was some like moral failing attached to negatively reviewing media and all of that jazz. So I went through that whole thing early in my BookTube days, and I'm over on TikTok and I've been going through the same thing where people have difficulty sort of differentiating between negative review of a work and like an attack on them personally because they love things to the point that they make it like part of their identity. I've made so many videos talking about what reviews are and why they're important and why critical consumption of media is important. And one thing that I keep talking about is the difference between like quality of a thing and my enjoyment of the thing. Now, I know that everybody rates and reviews differently. I take into consideration both quality and enjoyment when I'm doing my ratings, but even if you just rate purely on enjoyment or purely on quality, to me, there is a very clear difference between when we're talking about whether something is good and whether we liked it. And I've received so much pushback from people who don't want to or can't admit that they like bad things. And I'm like, bro, I like bad things too. We've all liked things that aren't the best quality, but that we can still find some enjoyment out of. And the whole thing about all of this is that it is extremely subjective. I'm talking about my own measures of quality and my own enjoyment. So even though I'm talking about quality, it is still subjective. We're still talking about what I think is good and bad, but that is still different than like if I enjoyed it. And so in all of those many discussions, the question has also come up about like, don't you ever just like something that's bad? Or don't you just ever read something with your brain off and all of that jazz? So I've been thinking about like 3-star books that I love. I don't know that I would love anything under a 3-star. Like maybe I enjoyed parts of a 2-star book, but at under 3 is where my enjoyment is really taking a nosedive. I'm not having a good time for the most part, but I do have a few examples of 3 or 3.5-star books that I really, really love. These are difficult to talk about also because the thing is that like the more they sit in my feelings or I reread them or read on in the series and gain more context and love for the characters overall, the more difficult it is to consider these 3 or 3.5-star books. Like these are books that I rated 3 or 3.5 star when I first read them. Like maybe I'll bump it up a 1/2 star or a star like upon reread, but I know that's through added context. But these are all books that when I first read them, I had pros and cons. They were middle of the road in terms of quality for me, but that I loved in terms of enjoyment. First up, we have Borne by VanderMeer. This is adult science fiction about a ruined city in the future. There is a giant flying bear that terrorizes the city. It has escaped from the confines of an unnamed company that was performing experiments, and because of this torture, he escapes and starts wreaking havoc on everyone and everything within the city. But at the same time, there are these scavengers, these people who live in the city who are kept alive by what they are able to scavenge out of the giant flying bear's fur. And while scavenging one day, our main character finds a creature, a living creature that she takes back home. And what we watch is her like developing relationship with this living creature and like her understanding of what exactly it is, as she's also trying to navigate like this ruined city that she lives in and other relationships that she has. I rated this 3.5 out of 5 stars when I first read it, and my huge complaint about it overall was really the pacing. The relationships that are established and the explorations of those relationships happens through repetition, and it really drags the middle of the story down. Like, I kept putting it down and not wanting to immediately pick it back up, but then once you hit the end of this book, things happen so quickly. Like, it is so breakneck that I also was like unsure if I understood everything that was happening. That all said, I loved the characters in this. I loved everything that it was exploring thematically about found families and humanity, like what makes a person and trust. All of those things were complicated and interesting, and this book has lived really well in my feelings and in my memories, which is unsurprising because my biggest gripe was pacing, which is something that will fade from your memories, and things like characters and moments and setup, like that has really stayed in my memory. So I'm super curious to reread this and see if the pacing would still bother me on reread, but for what it's worth, to capture my original experience, I think about this book all of the time. I think it's really interesting. I love how weird it is and how it just keeps being weird in a matter-of-fact way until it becomes normal to you, the reader. I think it is very much worth a read. The pacing is not great. Next we have Magic Bites by Ilona Andrews. Magic Bites is the first book in the Kate Daniels series, and in this book we follow Kate Daniels, who is a mercenary basically, and so she is hired to go out and fix magical problems, and her guardian is murdered. So she is back in the city of Atlanta to do some investigation of her own, and where that leads her is directly between the shapeshifters of Atlanta and the vampires of Atlanta. You guys have been hearing me talk about the Kate Daniels series for years now because I'm not done with the series. It's only 10 books, and not only am I terrible about reading series, but I just have not finished this one because I keep going back to the beginning and rereading the series. I love this series so much, and to me it is a series that gets better as it goes on. It gets stronger, which I think often happens with long-running series, but also like it keeps building, right? The thing that I love about every entry or as we go on in the series is that I've invested so much time and so many feelings into these characters, and you've got this like overarching plot that you've been building and building and building. But I gave the first one 3 out of 5 stars. It does a lot of setup. It does a lot of expositing. The world building is mainly just Kate telling us things, which I didn't dislike. It's just like a fact of this book is that a lot of it is just Kate telling us like, well, this is the way that it happens. These are these creatures, but it's so firmly rooted in Kate's voice that I found it like still an enjoyable experience. This is very tropey in some regards. It's got a lot of the trappings of a paranormal and urban fantasy, so it like scratches that itch, but also there aren't too many like unpredictable things or twists and turns here. And this book has one of my least favorite moments of the series so far, and I can't ever decide if it's like an on-purpose thing that I'm supposed to feel frustrated about or if it's like a plot hole thing. Kate gets blamed for something in this book. Like, they do something, they're wrong. It wasn't Kate's idea at all to do this thing, but then everybody's like, look at you, Kate, you're such a bad person because you got this wrong. And I'm always like, I don't understand. And the thing that like makes me think that it's not just like everyone making Kate a scapegoat here is that like not even Kate acknowledges that like that's not the way that this happens. Like, she takes on the blame in a way that I'm like, this doesn't make sense, and it kind of feels like a plot hole. It's one of my least favorite moments of the whole series, and I reread this a lot, so every time I get there I'm like, probably now if you asked me to rate this book I would give it like 3.5 or 4 star after my many rereads, but I absolutely know it's one of the weaker ones in the story. It's a first book in a series, so it has a lot of the weaker spots of an introduction to a bigger story. It is very exposition heavy. It has that one moment that I hate, so not the best thing ever, but I love it. All Systems Red by Martha Wells. All Systems Red is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. In this book, we are following Murderbot, who is a self-aware AI. They have hacked their own unit so that they can get rid of the module that basically governs their behavior. So unbeknownst to everyone around them, Murderbot is completely self-aware and self-governed, and they are currently on a mission just basically supervising a group of scientists who are doing surface tests, but a neighboring dream mission goes dark, and so it's down to this group of scientists and Murderbot to help them. This is another series that to me is greater than the sum of its parts. Not only do I think that this book is around a 3-star, but I think every book in the series is 3 to 4 stars. Like, none of them are perfect, wow, 5 stars for me. But if you ask me like my feelings on the series as a whole, I recommend it all of the time. And it's like a 4 to 5 star rated series to me. It just, all of it together, the cumulative experience is so wonderful. But these are novellas, and I think that some of the weaknesses here just have to do with it being novellas. I love Murderbot as a character, and there are a few other characters around them that I really, really love. But we're talking about a setting of space, so there are a lot of characters. It's like pretty expansive. It covers a lot of room and not a lot of space, and I think you start to feel that in some of the plots and in some of the ways that the like side characters melt into each other for me. Like, I had such a hard time sometimes differentiating between some of the side characters, except for like the AI and a couple of the humans. I also think that sometimes the plots get a little bit convoluted, but I'm not really there for any of that. I am there for Murderbot and the reluctant connections and friendships that they form. So all of that is really wonderful. The snark, the humor, the narrative voice in this are all like top notch. So even though quality wise as novellas, I do think that they have some weaknesses, I love the characters in this so much. They're so easy to read. I highly recommend them when people are especially like slumpy and you can't get into something. That's when I picked up All Systems Red, and I promptly binged the entire series, like everything that had come out already. So I love these a lot. Next is the Mercy Thompson series. I don't actually own book 1. Mercy Thompson is an adult urban fantasy series about a woman named Mercy Thompson who is a car mechanic, but she is also a shifter. She can turn into a coyote, and she can do so at will. She is very connected to the paranormal world in the Tri-City. Her next door neighbor is the alpha of the werewolf pack. She used to work for a gremlin. She is friends with a vampire. And so all of those different connections kind of come to a head as she gets called into more and more situations to do some investigation or help the magical communities out in the Tri-Cities. A lot of what I said about Kate Daniels applies to the Mercy Thompson series, even though with Kate Daniels, the more I reread it, the more that I love it. The more I reread the Mercy Thompson series, the more complicated my feelings get about it. So this is truly a series in general that, like, even in my feelings and like the full sum of it is still somewhere in that 3-star rating. But something that has been kind of a theme with all of these is that I absolutely love the characters. This is also very tropey in some ways in terms of like the genre. This is one of those books, especially early on, where like everyone loves the main character, like everyone that we meet. So many people fall in love with Mercy, which I get. She's awesome. I too love Mercy. But that starts like in later books. There's a character that it's hinted at. I'm not fully caught up. I'm missing one. That it's hinted at that he also had romantic feelings for Mercy at some point. And I hate it. I hate that one particular one. And also this is a white author and she's writing Mercy, who is half white and half indigenous. She doesn't know a lot of her background because that side of her family was her father, who died when she was very young. So it's like that trope of a white person writing like a biracial character, and the BIPOC side of that is unknown to them. When I first started reading, I was kind of like, I don't really know. Like, I didn't feel like I had anything to say about the representation. Like I didn't have the knowledge to comment on it. But the more and more that I reread this, the more it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Some of the stereotypes that are used or the way that it is presented, and not only with Mercy, because this is a very diverse series in terms of like the cast of characters, but even the ways that some of the Latinx characters or the Black characters are described, you can very much tell that one, it's dated, and two, it's coming from a white author. So that part keeps making me a little bit uncomfortable. Some of the direction keeps making me, it's not the best either. Mercy as a main character is one of my favorite main characters. I love her so much. She is where Kate Daniels is like the definition of like a high-powered, super-powered, kick-ass, snarky like lead. Mercy is cunning. She is brave. She's not super powered. Like she can shapeshift, but she becomes a coyote. So she's almost always outclassed, out of her weight class, basically. She's always going up against these people that are seemingly more powerful than her, but that never stops her from like getting in there and fighting when she thinks it's the right thing to do. I love her so freaking much. I do really enjoy her relationship with Adam Hauptman. I love that they've got a little bit of like that like alpha sort of thing, that alpha male thing that you see a lot in urban fantasy and paranormal romance, but they talk about it a lot. And part of what Mercy is kind of coming to terms with in the beginning is that power dynamic and some of the power imbalance between them, and the way that they deal with it and go about it, I think is really well done in the beginning of the series. So it has really good things. It has a few things that I am still kind of like wrapping my head around what exactly it means. The writing is fine. Some of the plots are better than others. So generally a 3-star experience that I love. And finally, The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. This is YA science fiction about a human colony on an alien planet, and basically there are only men living on this planet. When they arrive to settle, all of the women caught a mysterious disease and died, and Todd, our main character, is the last one to become a man. So when you reach your 13th or 14th birthday, you become a man, and there is like a ceremony and an initiation, and he is the last person in Prentisstown to become a man. Right before his birthday, his fathers pull him aside and tell him basically that everything that he knows about Prentisstown is wrong, and that they've been holding the secret, and he has to get out of town like right now. So he goes on the run, and immediately as he goes out of the settlement and into the forest, he comes across a spaceship that has crash landed on the planet, and the survivor is a girl. It is the first woman that he has ever met, and they go on there through the rest of their adventure. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars the first time that I read it, and I would probably bump that up like a full star if you asked me today, but that's probably all emotion talking. This is a book that heavily relies on withholding information from the main character, and we do get a very cyclical plot in terms of like the two main characters being on the run, getting caught, escaping, being on the run, and it's kind of like over and over and over again. Also, the main villain in this is very mustache twirling in a way that, especially in my first 1 or 2 reads, I did not enjoy. I did reread this in 2020, like in the middle of the pandemic or around the time of the election, and so like the believability of mustache twirling villains like hit differently in that moment, where I was like, no, absolutely, like this religious zealot, like who is just coming after people for no other reason than he is an evil man, like rings truer and less hollow than it did at another time of my life. But I can still step back and say, with like within the confines of the story, there is something lacking to the characterization and the motivation of that one main villain. I recommend this to people. I've read it with like 3 different groups of friends now, and nobody has enjoyed it as much as I do. People really don't enjoy this as a reading experience because we are following a very unlikable main character at the beginning of his arc, where he is indoctrinated. He is very stubbornly holding on to that indoctrination, even when he's facing like evidence contrary to everything he's known. It is very difficult for him to let go of his lived experience, even in the face of that. And again, the whole thing is that he has been kept in the dark, even with the thing here, which is that like men have their thoughts, like everybody can hear them on the outside. There are still ways that information is being withheld, which I know is very frustrating for some readers. It's also like part of the way that it characterizes Todd to us at the very beginning as an unlikable character is that he's mean to his dog, and the whole thing is about violence. So the fact that people get like hung up on the mean to the dog. Not that I like to see people being mean to animals in any fiction, but there's so much other violence in here that people like gloss over to just be like, the dog, which always is like wild to me, but I get it. You know, he's mean to his dog, and there are plenty of other content warnings here for both animals and people. I understand why this is not an enjoyable reading experience, but I love Todd. I love Viola. I love the exploration of toxic masculinity in this. The writing is so firmly rooted in Todd's voice. It is one of the best books that I've ever read that really captures like a dialect, a style of writing, a voice for a main character. So this lives really, really strongly in my feelings, even though I can step back and see some of the weaknesses of the story. That's it for me today. I would love to hear about some books that you know are not the best quality, like, you know, 3-star books, but that you still love. I'm also curious if there's anything lower, like are there books that you would qualify 2 or 1 star that you love? Like I said, for me, like after a 3, and I can't say that I love any of that. But that's me. I'm very curious about people's like personal reading styles, and you know, that intersection between like what you think is good versus what you enjoy. Also, it's interesting because in that video that I was making about like my time on TikTok and challenges, I also was talking about like being perceived as negative and like overly negative or whatnot, and no matter how much I try to like balance my content or whatnot, having that like stigma or that perception of being super negative like all over the place or whatnot. And I got into a conversation with like a commenter about how she basically felt that I was more effusive about my hate than my love of things, which I kind of had to reflect on whether that was true or not, whether I felt it was more difficult for me to talk about the reasons why I love something versus the reasons why I hate something. And I don't necessarily think that that is the case, but I think that there's just more like quantity wise when I hate something, and in a lot of my negative reviews, there's just more to talk about, because when I hate something and when I love something, I can talk about the elements there, like writing, setting, characters, whatnot. But when I hate something, there's usually some other additional thing of it being problematic. So I'm also talking about representation or racism or misogyny or some additional element. So it becomes not only about like the craft of the book, but also like some other problematic element. And maybe that is what accounts for like just having more material to really sink in when things are really, really bad. Or maybe, you know, I just find it easier to hate stuff. I don't know. It doesn't feel that way. But all of that aside, what feels true to me is actually that the most difficult thing to rate for me is like those middle of the road books, those 3-star books. A lot of times what I end up feeling for 3-star books is like, yeah, that was fine. And it's always so hard to dig deeper into that like ambivalent or like sure it was fine or just okay feeling. Like if I hate or if I love, I can dig in there. But if it's like in the middle, that's always tougher for me. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.